It's time for Recipe of the Day. I love meatloaf and I'm always trying to find ways to make it even better. And so I've wrapped it in bacon. That's what we've got going on today. Bacon wrapped meatloaf. It is juicy and delicious inside. It has a little barbecue sauce going on and then nice crispy bacon outside. Add salt, flavor, and well, baconness, you know. As with so many of my recipes that use ground meat, I am instructing you to mix together all of the other ingredients first, mix them well, and then add the meat. And then you just mix it until it looks kind of evenly distributed. And the reason for that is that if you overmix ground meat, like ground beef, ground turkey, ground chicken, any ground meat, what actually happens is that you compress those nice strands of meat and it makes it tougher. And if you just think about that for a second, you know what I'm talking about. When you're taking ground beef out of the package, you know how it's like these like tubular strands and they're kind of fluffy if you think about it. That is what gives us that like nice soft texture to ground meat when it's cooked, is because of that space. Those strands are not dense at all. Now, if you take them and you smoosh them all together and smoosh each one into itself as well, you're making it denser and then it's going to be tough and nowhere near as good. So whenever you're working with ground meat, try whatever you can to not have to mix it very much. And this is one of my favorite ways to do it. So that's essentially the first step. First though, preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and then line a large baking sheet that has a rim with parchment paper or foil. We're not doing this in a loaf pan. I actually never cook my meatloaf in a loaf pan. I like how nice and brown it gets on the outside. And I really don't like when I've made it in a loaf pan before and some of the liquid and fat comes out of the beef and it's just kind of like sitting in it in the loaf pan. I don't like that as much. I would rather it kind of drain off on the sheet pan. You know what I mean? Okay, so you're going to line that sheet pan and that's just so that things aren't going to stick as bad to the pan later, makes cleanup easier. Then as promised, we're mixing together all of the other ingredients before adding the meat. So crack a large egg into a large bowl and give it a little whisk. Then add in a half cup of dry breadcrumbs, 2 tablespoons ketchup, 1 tablespoon Worcestershire sauce, 2 teaspoons Italian seasoning, a half teaspoon garlic powder, a half teaspoon onion powder, and a half teaspoon of salt. Mix those together well. Now, if you're wondering why I've used garlic powder and onion powder in here instead of fresh, it's just because it's easier. You have to pretty much saute the onion before putting it in the meatloaf. Otherwise, you get these like crunchy bits of onion in your meatloaf. And so then you have to chop the onion, melt the butter, saute the onion. Not a huge deal, but meh, just takes longer. And honestly, I find that one of the challenges people sometimes have with meatloaf is that it's falling apart a little bit. It doesn't hold together as well as they'd like when they go to slice it. And I find that adding those chunky bits to the meatloaf is possibly one of the causes for that. So we just avoid any little pieces in there, stick with dry, wet ingredients on the meat, and that is going to be the easiest. Okay, so you got the egg, the breadcrumbs, all those other flavorful seasonings and things in there. Mix those up really good until it's well combined. Now we know that all of that is mixed up. So then when we add in our 2 pounds of lean ground beef and use your hands to kind of like mix it around a little bit, when it looks like those seasonings, when that wet mixture with breadcrumbs and everything is kind of woven through that fairly well, you stop. It doesn't have to be perfect because when you take a bite of the food, you're going to get some bits that have a little more seasoning, some that have a little bit less, but it's going to kind of meet up in the middle. So as long as it looks somewhat well mixed through, you're good. Then you're going to take that meat and transfer it to your baking sheet that you lined with the parchment or foil, and you form that into a loaf that's 10 inches long and 5 inches wide. Then spread the top with 2 tablespoons of barbecue sauce. It is now time for the bacon. So I know this is called bacon wrapped meatloaf, but we're not actually wrapping it all the way around because any bacon that ends up underneath doesn't really cook or crisp and is just kind of rubbery. And I didn't like it at all. It made it harder to slice. Like everything about it was not good. It also was hard to get the bacon under there. I ended up having to lay the bacon down and then transfer the loaf onto it and then wrap the bacon up over, and then it didn't look as nice. So then I flipped it over. It just was messy and difficult and not fun and didn't taste good. So we're not doing that. Instead, we're just draping the bacon over the top of the loaf so that it hangs down the sides. And then you just tuck a little bit underneath. Any that's sort of still pooling at the bottom there, tuck under, and that's going to help keep the bacon in place without having a ton of bacon underneath that's going to get rubbery. Do you see what I mean? So it's going to be 8 slices of bacon that you just lay over the top, and so that each one is draping down the sides and tuck them under. Then that goes into your 350 degree Fahrenheit oven for 45 minutes, and that is uncovered. Do watch it. If the bacon does look like it's getting too crisp, you can cover it with a little bit of foil, but I haven't had that problem. After the 45 minutes, you brush it with 2 more tablespoons of barbecue sauce all over the bacon, and then it goes back into the oven until the internal temperature is 160 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to take 15 to 20 minutes more. And this is one of those times where if you have a probe thermometer with like a digital reader that sits outside of the oven while the probe is in the meat on the inside, this is a good time to use that because you put it in right at the very beginning, and then you can watch it and you know when you're getting close to done, so you know how to prepare the other things for your meal. I find it really convenient. If you don't have one, I'm going to link to the one that I have because I like it. It's not expensive or fancy or anything. It was $19.98. I just looked it up on Amazon and it works great. So if you don't have one, I recommend this one. I'll put the link for it in the show notes for this podcast episode for you. Okay, so whether you're using that thermometer or an instant read thermometer or whatever you've got, when it is 160 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle, it is done. You take it out of the oven and then just let it rest there on the pan for at least 10 minutes. And that is really important for meatloaf. As I said, some people have a problem where their meatloaf doesn't hold into slices. It is because, or one of the reasons is because it possibly hasn't rested long enough. When it comes out of the oven, it's really hot inside. The juices are all really bubbling and moving around inside the meatloaf. And so when you cut into it, yes, the juices are going to come out, but also they're making everything kind of extra wet and moving, and they're more likely to crumble and fall apart. If you let those juices settle down first, it's more likely to hold together. And you know, this is actually like super true because if you make 2 meatloaves, I often do this, one for now and one to use the leftovers to make sandwiches or to put in the freezer for another day. The one that you just cool completely, that slices like amazing. You could even put that on a meat slicer. My parents used to do it at their deli. You put it on the meat slicer and can slice it like actually thin. It is holding together that well. So that is really important. Let that meatloaf rest. I will also advise you that when it's time to slice it, you should slice between the strips of bacon. So there's just like a little gap in between them sometimes, and you can get your knife in there and then slice down through the meat. And that's just because the bacon is crispy and your knife is trying to get through something hard with the soft meat underneath. It doesn't have anything to push against. And so it's really hard to get good slices. Whereas if you go between the strips of bacon, then you can get right through that soft meat. No problem. Okay, I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is August 21st of 2025. And I will also let you know a little trick. You know, there are so many AI recipes out there right now on the internet, on social media. You never know what is a real recipe that was made by a real person, tested, that actually tastes good and works versus something created by a machine. If you want recipes that you know you can trust, you can always come to my websites and search there. So that's cookthestory.com and thecookful.com. You can bookmark those. Or if you type my name, first name and last name, and then the recipe that you're looking for into Google, you will find stuff from both of my sites. So if you type in Christine Pittman meatball recipe or Christine Pittman meatloaf recipe, you will get all of my meatloaf recipes right there in Google. So that is a great strategy for finding delicious recipes that you know you can trust because I created them and tested them myself. No machines involved. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.